Hi, I'm Michael Apple for BizNews.com. It's a great pleasure to chat to Dr. Nakampe Masiapato. He's the Commissioner of the newly established Border Management Authority. Our border security is an increasingly hot topic, so it's a great time to chat to him. Commissioner, South Africa has the police, the SANDF, South African Revenue Service, Home Affairs officials at borders. Where does the BMA fit in exactly?
The establishment of Border Management Authority basically means that we are then going to be moving away from a multi-agency approach in terms of border management into what we call an integrated border management model, through which each and every port of entry will have a single commander in order to ensure the whole issue of accountability and very seamless command and control. In terms of the rest of the department, I can indicate that the main integration will be for the immigration, which is fairly from Home Affairs, the Department of Health, the Department of the Environment, as well as the Department of Agriculture, including access control, which is currently done by SAPS. All those 5 functions will all be integrated into the Border Management Authority. However, we have to then still do some bit of coordination with the other 3 organs of state, and those are the SANDF operating on the borderline together with SAPS in terms of crime issues and also South African Revenue Services in terms of trade facilitation.
The Border Management Authority Act of 2020, I read it yesterday. It states one of your aims is to contribute to the prevention of smuggling and trafficking of human beings and goods. I think it's widely known and acknowledged that our borders are pretty porous. Our fences are cut all over the place. Are you focusing your attention on ports of entry or more in a border patrol sense, or both?
Yeah, so in actual fact, on the basis of the provisions of the Border Management Authority Act, it does give us the responsibility to operate in both areas. So we basically call the port a port of entry and the borderline what we call a border law enforcement area. So over and above the work we'll do in the ports, which is very much straightforward, when it comes to our contribution on the borderline, this is how our contribution will be. There are areas on the borderline which we describe as the vulnerable areas or the vulnerable segments of the borderline. It is in those specific areas around the ports, mostly 10 kilometers away from the ports themselves, but also even beyond 10 kilometers. Those vulnerable areas are the areas where we will then be doing static deployment of the border guards. Static deployment basically means they will be stationed there physically, making sure that those areas are not then being compromised. And that will then enable members of the South African National Defence Force to be able to do their high mobility deployment in terms of looking over the entire 4,772 kilometers of the borderline. And of course, in their work, they will identify further areas of vulnerability, will then be able to still deploy the border guards in those areas. So that is why there is an implementation protocol which then guides the relationship between the Border Management Authority as well as the members of the South African National Defence Force.
You're also looking at protecting South Africa's environmental and natural resources. What in particular are we talking about here?
Yeah, so basically, if you look at the responsibility, for instance, that is currently done by the colleagues from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, those particular functions are then going to be coming through into the Border Management Authority. So in there, we talk about issues of biosecurity, we talk about issues of fauna as well as issues of flora, for instance. In there, you will realize that the actual relationship or the actual interface also goes together with the responsibilities currently performed by our colleagues from the Department of Agriculture, Rural Development and Land Reform. So when you look at that, basket of functions, they are actually more interlinked. Let me give a simpler example in terms of agriculture, just to start with, is the issues around making sure that animals from our neighboring jurisdictions do not just cross the border into South Africa. We have to then deal with those kind of activities in terms of addressing issues of, foot and mouth disease, as an example. And that is then one of those responsibilities. But in terms of biosecurity, it's also to make sure that for example, chemicals that might not necessarily be allowed based on international protocols are being brought into our jurisdiction, which can then be used for any other illegal or criminal activities, which then can end up damaging the environment within our country, as it were. So our responsibility is to make sure that only those that are authorized, and only those that are actually, I would say, people have the authorization by the respective agencies, whether it's your non-proliferation committees and all of those, are then authorized to come through. And those that are not authorized are actually have to be blocked in our ports of entry and also on our borderline.
What is the size of the contingent of border guards that have been trained? I saw pictures of them in their uniforms. They're all armed, have bulletproof vests. What did their training involve broadly? All the Act says is they must be adequate and appropriately trained. What did that involve?
Yeah, maybe let me start by saying that the journey of establishing the Border Management Authority in the current financial year, which is 2022-2023, we are currently incubated within the Department of Home Affairs just for this financial year. We are expected to exit the incubation by the 1st of April next year in 2023. Now, what is it that we are doing in the current financial year? We do two things. The first one is the integration, and the integration we've spoken about is to make sure that all those officials working for all those other departments are going to enter through a process of vetting, training, and all of that, and then they will ultimately migrate and be employees of the BMA. That is the first part. But the second part is the one you're talking about, and that is the capacitation. So in the capacitation process, we had to bring in some new people into the environment whilst at the same time doing the integration. So in this instance, we're only given around 67 million by National Treasury to bring in around 200 border guards. So in there, we have chief border guards, we have senior border guards, and we have border guards. So in there, we have basically trained them in all of these various spectrums of work. However, their key area of deployment is then going to be on the vulnerable segments on the borderline. Some of them will also be doing access control. So in terms of training, they had been trained in a number of things. If you can then talk about soft training, for instance, they've been trained on issues of patriotism, trained on issues of integrity, trained on issues of ethics, but also trained in terms of the work relating to health, environment, immigration, as well as environment on the border environment to understand the entire spectrum. So we trained them that in terms of soft skills. In terms of the hardcore training, most of those people came from the Defense Force, and some of them came from the police, some of them came from correctional services, and some of them came from some of the metros around the country. They had already been trained, and we had to enhance their training in terms of building that collective culture within the Border Management Authority, as it were. But in terms of the physical, we did all of the various physical elements of training, as you will know, for any law enforcement agency.
So I suppose 67 million rand is an initial budget and 200 border guards, many of them senior. There will be a question whether this will be ramped up. Do you have a medium-term time frame in which you look to get more boots on the ground and more money in the pocket?
Definitely. So the issue is, as I said, we are just now under incubation within the Department of Home Affairs. So this period of incubation allows us, as I've said, to do the integration. In terms of capacitation, this is just the first cohort. So currently we are engaged with the department, with the National Treasury, within the context of what is called the medium-term expenditure framework. We are then engaging there in terms of what will be our new financial requirements when we become a stand-alone public entity from the 1st of April next year. Arising from that, we are then doing some mathematical calculations in terms of the number of people that will be coming from the department, how much is it in terms of their salaries, how much is it in terms of their operational cost, how much is it in terms of the assets and all of that. Once we are busy with all of that, when we are done, we will then, as we are doing now, start identifying what will then be the new money that will be required to further capacitate the authority going forward. And we are putting all of those proposals on the table as we speak. We've been engaging with the National Treasury in a number of occasions. But the key is to ultimately demonstrate, arising from what will then come from the department, what will be the new money required. Indeed, there is going to be a new money that will be brought through into the Border Management Authority so that from the 1st of April comes We now are operating independent with our own independent budget, and that budget will enable us to then augment the numbers of the border guards on the ground. That is going to be very much critical, primarily because we do appreciate the magnitude of the problem. You will remember in our roadmap, for example, we are looking at almost, I would say, until 2030 in a way, in terms of the roll down. And in each and every financial year, we'll get new money to be able to augment the numbers so that we can ultimately address these issues of porous borders.
The Act states a border guard must be a fit and proper person to serve and must have a trustworthy and exemplary character. Commissioner, how are you going to guard against corruption within your ranks? Give us an idea of the sort of ship you're going to captain.
So the first thing is to accept that point. And I think that one is more wider in a way, about corruption as it were. But what have we done? Firstly, in terms of this first 200 cohort, we have done very intensive vetting, on them. And that vetting, we did it in collaboration with the state security agents. So that is the most thing that we have actually, I would say, done in terms of making sure that the people that we onboard are people of grounded character. But additional to that, we have already set through a process wherein we will then be doing continuous lifestyle audits on their lives, as they continue to do this work, primarily in terms of looking at their declaration of assets, as it is a requirement, arising from that, being able to juxtapose that against the income that they get and be able to pick up an outlier. In instances where we pick up an outlier, we will be able to deal with that. But just in the broader context, we have also made them to take an oath. During the launch, you might have had one of the border guards standing in front, reading the oath on behalf of the rest of them. And part of the provisions in that oath is for them to commit to watch over each other and make sure that none of their colleagues get compromised in front of them. And that is the other. But the other issue, we have then set up a system of close monitoring as well as close supervision. Hence, we have chief border guards, we have senior border guards, and all of those, for example, senior border guards will have a small team that they're going to be overseeing, and the chief border guards are going to be overseeing the activities of those those leaders. The reason why we have that closer supervisory model is to make sure that we are able to have a closer look on the activities of each and every border guard and make sure that none of them get easily compromised.
You have a 5-year term of office, which can be extended for a further period of 5 years. What are the goals that you want to achieve in your term, and on what basis would you evaluate your performance, or will your performance be evaluated?
Firstly, my short-term goal is what I'm doing in the current financial year. Firstly, is to make sure that at the end of the day, we have all of those various functions integrated. So that is my first in the current financial year. Once all of those integrations are done, part of my second goal is to make sure that new systems basically get kind of developed as we go into the new financial year, integrated system with a single view, as it were. And in there, we should then be able to make sure that we do an integrated border management after all of the integration has happened. But of course, the other issue then is to start doing the actual capacitation of the border guard. Now, what is it that will demonstrate my contribution if we take it in the span of 5 years, as we've indicated? One, I had indicated that if you look at the deployments that we have done now, for instance, we have deployed in the Musina border area. And what is it that we want to deal with there? Number one, we want to deal with illegal migration. Number two, we have to be dealing with issues of the bringing in of illegal explosives, which are used in bombing ATMs, which are used in bombing underground in terms of illicit mining, as it were. Now, what will demonstrate that one is kind of succeeding on that? You see, the kind of job I have, South Africa should be able to assess my performance. One, to be able to see that people are no longer finding it easy to just walk into the country. Two, people should be able to see some kind of reduction in the explosives in terms of whether is exploding of the ATMs and all of those kind of issues. They should be able to see that. But the other thing which is very much clear, people that are staying in the border environment should be able to assess the performance. For instance, there are people that are on a daily basis dealing with issues of stock theft, for example. So once we statically deploy the border guards, we want to see the reduction in those kind of instances. If you look at northern KwaZulu-Natal, we have deployed up there around Kosi Bay. We want to deal with these issues of 4x4s being stolen from South Africans and being moved through into Mozambique. We want to see those kind of issues also being mitigated. So I will say that in the whole spectrum of the period that I will be having, South Africa should be able to start seeing less and less of illegal migrants entering the country. At the same time, Immigration Inspectorate, together with SAPS in the country, should be doing their job in terms of identifying people that are undesirable, people that are in the country illegally, and be able to export them. My role will be to make sure they don't come back or they don't walk back. And that is what, in the longer term or in 5 years' time, South Africa should be able to see that this whole notion of porous borders had fairly been mitigated.
Well, Commissioner, it's an incredibly important job. We wish you well. Thank you for your time.
That's great. Thank you very much, Michael. Keep well.